The dangerous storm arrives. The air felt colder than usual, a biting chill that cut through the walls of the small home like knives. Emma Carter rubbed her hands together, her breath visible in the dim light of the room. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it shards of ice that tapped furiously against the windows. This wasn't just another winter storm. It was something far worse. Emma glanced over at her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, who was sitting on the floor with her favorite stuffed animal, a floppy-eared rabbit she called Bun Bun. Lily's tiny hands trembled as she hugged the rabbit close, her big brown eyes fixed on her mother. "Mommy, is the storm going to break our house?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma forced a smile, though her heart felt heavy with worry. "No, sweetheart. Our house is strong. It's just a little noisy outside, that's all." But Emma knew it wasn't just noise. The storm had been raging for hours, growing more violent with every passing minute. This alien planet, which humans had settled a decade ago, was known for its harsh winters, but this was unprecedented. Reports from the colony's communication network warned of plummeting temperatures, ice winds capable of ripping through steel, and total power failures. Emma reached for her communicator to check for updates. The screen flickered, then went blank. The power had gone out an hour ago, and now even the backup systems were failing. The heater had already stopped working, leaving the house freezing cold. Emma grabbed a thick blanket from the couch and wrapped it around Lily. "Stay here, okay? I'm going to check something," she said, trying to sound calm. Lily nodded, her little face pale with fear. Emma stepped into the tiny kitchen and opened the cabinets. Cans of food, some bottled water, but nothing that would help them survive the dropping temperatures. She closed the cabinet door and leaned against it, her mind racing. They couldn't stay here much longer. If the temperature kept falling, they'd freeze before morning. Emma walked back into the living room and crouched in front of Lily. "Listen to me, sweetie. We might need to go somewhere safer if it gets too cold. Okay, but don't worry. I'll keep you safe. I promise." "Where will we go?" Lily asked, clutching Bun Bun tighter. Emma hesitated. The colony's supply depot was about 2 miles away. It had emergency gear, thermal blankets, portable heaters, and other supplies that could save their lives. But the journey there would be treacherous. The storm wasn't just dangerous, it was lethal. Still, staying here wasn't an option. "We'll go somewhere where it's warmer," Emma said, avoiding the details for now. She didn't want to scare Lily more than she already was. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, making both of them jump. Emma ran to the window and peered through the frosted glass. The storage shed in their backyard had collapsed under the weight of the ice. Emma's heart sank. That shed had tools, extra blankets, and other supplies they could have used. Now it was just a pile of rubble. Emma turned back to Lily, who was staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Mommy, I don't like this storm. I want it to stop." "I know, baby," Emma said, kneeling down and pulling her daughter into a hug. "I want it to stop too." For a moment, they sat there in silence, the only sounds being the howling wind and the occasional creak of the house. Emma's mind raced, weighing her options. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. Then, she remembered the old map tucked away in one of the drawers. It showed the layout of the colony, including the location of the supply depot. Emma hurried to the desk and rummaged through the drawers until she found it. Unfolding the worn piece of paper, she traced her finger along the path to the depot. It would take about an hour to walk there in normal weather. In this storm, it could take much longer, if she even made it at all. But what choice did she have? Emma looked back at Lily, who was now lying on the couch under the blanket. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her small body shivered despite the layers she wore. Emma's chest tightened. She couldn't let anything happen to her little girl. "Lily," she said softly, walking over to her, "I'm going to get us some supplies to keep us warm. I need you to be very brave and stay here while I go. Can you do that for me?" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "No, Mommy. Don't go. What if you don't come back?" Emma swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "I will come back, I promise. I'll be as quick as I can. You just stay here, stay warm, and wait for me." Lily sniffled and nodded reluctantly. Emma kissed her forehead and wrapped her in the blanket again. Then she grabbed her coat, gloves, and an old flashlight. As she opened the door, the icy wind hit her like a wall, stealing her breath and making her eyes water. She turned back for one last look at Lily. "I love you," she said, her voice firm despite the storm raging outside. "I love you too, Mommy," Lily whispered. And with that, Emma stepped out into the storm, the door shutting behind her with a heavy thud. The desperate plan. Emma stumbled back into the house, her face pale and her lips trembling from the biting cold outside. She shut the door quickly, leaning against it as if the storm itself might try to break in. Ice clung to her coat, and her gloves were stiff from the frost. For a moment, she just stood there, catching her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. Lily peeked out from under the blanket on the couch. "Mommy, what's wrong?" she asked, her small voice filled with worry. Emma forced a smile, though her mind was racing. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said softly. "The storm is just stronger than I thought." But it wasn't okay. Emma had stepped outside to check the strength of the winds and the condition of the road leading to the depot. What she'd seen was worse than she could have imagined. The snow was piling up quickly, the wind howled like a living creature, and the ice underfoot was so slick it was like walking on glass. Yet she knew one thing for sure: they wouldn't survive the night if she didn't act. Emma crouched down beside Lily, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I need to tell you something important," she began, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Our heater isn't working anymore, and it's getting too cold. I have to go to the supply depot to get something to keep us warm." Lily's eyes widened, and she shook her head, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. "No, Mommy, you can't go. The storm will get you." Emma placed her hands on Lily's shoulders, trying to calm her. "I have to, baby. If I don't, we'll both get too cold. But I promise I'll be careful, and I'll come back as fast as I can." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes. "What if you don't come back? What if you get lost?" Emma's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I will come back. You're my little girl, and I would never leave you. You're the most important thing in the world to me." Lily sniffled, nodding reluctantly, though she didn't let go of Emma's arm. "You have to come back, Mommy." "I will," Emma said firmly. "Now listen. While I'm gone, you need to stay here, stay warm under the blankets, and wait for me. If anything happens, you go next door to Mrs. Harper's house, okay?" Lily nodded again, though her small hands trembled as she clutched her rabbit. "Okay, Mommy." Emma kissed her forehead, then stood and grabbed her backpack. She quickly stuffed it with essentials: a flashlight, a water bottle, and a flare gun she'd kept for emergencies. She slipped on her heavy coat, wrapping a scarf tightly around her neck, and pulled on her thick boots. But as she prepared to leave, an idea struck her. She turned back to Lily. "Wait here. I'll be right back." Emma hurried to the kitchen and dug through the cabinets until she found an old thermal blanket, the kind that reflected heat. It was thin but lightweight, something she could carry easily. She also grabbed a small jar of peanut butter and tucked it into her bag. Food might help if the journey became longer than she expected. Finally, she returned to the living room, where Lily sat waiting anxiously. Emma knelt in front of her and handed her the thermal blanket. "This is for you. Wrap it around yourself, okay? It'll help keep you warm." Lily nodded, her small fingers gripping the shiny material tightly. "Be careful, Mommy," she whispered. Emma smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I will. I'll be back soon." Taking a deep breath, she stood and walked to the door. Her hand hovered over the handle for a moment as the sound of the storm roared on the other side. It wasn't just the cold or the wind that scared her. Something about the storm felt alive, almost like it was watching her, waiting for her to step outside. Pushing the thought aside, Emma opened the door and stepped out. The wind hit her like a physical force, nearly knocking her backward. She gritted her teeth and pulled her scarf higher over her face, taking one step after another into the blinding snow. Her visibility was near zero. The flashlight beam barely pierced the swirling snow, and every gust of wind felt like icy knives cutting into her skin. She had to stay focused, one foot in front of the other, no matter what. The depot was only 2 miles away. She repeated that in her head like a mantra. 2 miles. 2 miles. The storm seemed to grow angrier with each step, but Emma refused to turn back. Lily's face filled her mind, her little girl waiting for her return. That thought gave her strength. No matter how hard the storm tried to push her back, Emma pushed harder. As she moved deeper into the blizzard, she began to notice strange things. The wind carried eerie, howling sounds, almost like whispers, though she couldn't tell if it was the storm or her imagination. She stumbled across patches of ground where the ice looked unnaturally smooth, as if something had been dragged across it recently. Her heart began to race, but she shook her head, forcing herself to focus. 2 miles, she whispered to herself. Just 2 miles. With her flashlight flickering and the storm growing fiercer, Emma pressed on, unaware that the true danger was not just the storm, but something else lurking within it. The ice storm's wrath. Emma's legs burned as she trudged through the unrelenting storm, each step feeling heavier than the last. The wind screamed in her ears, drowning out every other sound. Snow lashed her face like shards of glass, and her flashlight flickered weakly, casting faint beams of light onto the icy wasteland ahead. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, every exhale forming a small cloud in the frigid air. The storm seemed alive, like it was testing her resolve, throwing everything it could to make her turn back. But Emma couldn't afford to stop. Lily's face, pale and shivering, flashed in her mind. Her little girl was depending on her. The ground beneath her feet was treacherous, a slick layer of ice hidden under the thick snow. She slipped and fell hard, the impact jolting her entire body. Pain shot through her knee as she scrambled to her feet, her gloves coated in icy slush. For a moment, she stood there, catching her breath and staring into the endless white void. She felt small, insignificant, like a single spark of warmth in a world that wanted nothing more than to snuff her out. The supply depot was still a mile away, at least she thought it was. The storm had made it impossible to tell where she was anymore. Even the landmarks she'd relied on, like the cluster of trees or the old fence line, were buried under snow and ice. Emma tightened her scarf around her face, her fingers stiff and aching as she adjusted her backpack. Just keep moving, she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. One step at a time. She pushed forward, her boots crunching against the snow. But then she noticed something strange. The wind carried a new sound, faint but distinct, a low, guttural growl that sent a chill racing down her spine. Emma froze, straining to hear over the storm. It came again, louder this time, and closer. Her heart pounded as she swung her flashlight around, its weak beam cutting through the swirling snow. At first, she saw nothing but white. Then, just on the edge of her vision, a shadow moved, a large, hulking shape that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Panic surged through her veins. She'd heard rumors about the predators on this planet, creatures that only ventured out during the fiercest storms. They were built for this environment, their fur thick enough to withstand the cold, their claws sharp enough to slice through ice and flesh. Emma's grip tightened on the flashlight. She hadn't brought a weapon, only the flare gun tucked into her bag. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She kept walking, her steps quicker now, her eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement. The growling came again, this time from behind her. Emma spun around, her flashlight trembling in her hand. For a split second, she saw it, a massive wolf-like creature with glowing yellow eyes, its fur coated in frost. It was watching her, its breath visible in the freezing air. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she knew better. Running would only make her an easier target. Instead, she backed away slowly, keeping her flashlight trained on the creature. It took a step forward, its claws crunching against the ice. Emma's heart raced as she reached into her bag, her fingers fumbling for the flare gun. The creature growled again, its lips curling back to reveal sharp, glistening teeth. She finally found the flare gun and pulled it out, raising it with shaking hands. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice raw with fear. The creature didn't flinch. It took another step, its massive body rippling with muscle. Emma's thumb found the trigger, and she fired. The flare shot out in a burst of red light, hissing as it arced through the air. The creature recoiled, snarling as the light blinded it momentarily. Emma didn't wait to see what would happen next. She turned and ran, her boots slipping on the ice as she bolted into the storm. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her chest burning as she pushed herself to move faster. The depot couldn't be far now. She just had to make it. Behind her, the growling faded, but she didn't dare slow down. She kept running until her legs felt like they would give out, until the outline of a building finally emerged through the snow. Relief flooded her as she stumbled toward it, her hands reaching out to touch the icy walls. She had made it to the supply depot. But as she leaned against the wall, catching her breath, a new fear gripped her. The growling was gone, but she could feel something else, like she was being watched. Emma turned slowly, her flashlight flickering in the storm. The snow swirled around her, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, from the shadows, another shape emerged. This one was smaller than the first, but its glowing eyes burned just as bright. It wasn't the same creature, but it was something just as dangerous. Emma gripped the flare gun tightly, her knuckles white. The depot door was just a few feet away, but the creature blocked her path. She had no choice but to face it. Her fight wasn't over yet. The alien encounter. The supply depot loomed before Emma, a hulking structure encased in thick layers of ice. Its metal walls were streaked with frost, and the heavy steel door was partially buried under a mound of snow. Emma staggered forward, her body aching and her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had made it, but the silence felt wrong. The storm still raged around her, but the absence of life, of movement, sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She stepped up to the door and pulled at the frozen handle. It didn't budge. She tried again, gritting her teeth, but the ice had welded it shut. Emma dropped her bag and pulled out a small multi-tool, using its blade to chip away at the ice. The storm roared behind her, and she worked quickly, her hands shaking with cold and exhaustion. Finally, the ice cracked, and the door creaked open. Emma slipped inside, slamming it shut behind her. The sudden quiet was deafening. She leaned against the door, catching her breath as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. The depot was cold and dark, its power systems clearly offline. Rows of shelves stretched into the shadows, their contents covered in frost. Emma switched on her flashlight and began searching. She moved quickly, grabbing what she could. Thermal blankets, heat packs, a portable heater. Each item felt like a small victory, a step closer to saving Lily. Her bag was almost full when she heard it, a soft, shuffling sound from deeper within the depot. She froze, her flashlight beam trembling as she turned toward the noise. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. Emma's grip tightened on the flashlight as she stepped toward the sound. Her boots crunched against the icy floor, the noise unnaturally loud in the silence. She rounded a corner, her flashlight sweeping across the shelves, but saw nothing, just shadows and frost. Then the sound came again, closer this time. It was a wet, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. Emma's heart pounded as she moved toward it, her every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she couldn't, not without knowing what was in here with her. She turned another corner and froze. In the beam of her flashlight, something moved. It was hunched over, its body thin and wiry, its skin a pale, translucent white that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. It looked up at her, its large black eyes unblinking and filled with an unsettling intelligence. Its hands were clawed, and its mouth, lined with needle-like teeth, opened in a low guttural growl. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, her hands shaking as she reached for the flare gun in her bag. The creature tilted its head, watching her with an eerie calmness, as though it was deciding whether she was a threat or a meal. She raised the flare gun, her voice trembling. "Stay back." The creature didn't move. It simply stared, its growl fading into a deep, rhythmic clicking sound. Emma's finger hovered over the trigger, but something about its behavior stopped her from firing. It wasn't attacking. Not yet. Then she noticed something. Behind the creature, partially hidden under a pile of debris, was a smaller figure. It was another of its kind, but smaller, weaker. The young alien's leg was pinned under a fallen metal beam, its body trembling as it let out soft, pained cries. The larger creature looked back at the trapped alien, then at Emma. Its clicking grew louder, more urgent, and it stepped aside, revealing the injured youngling more clearly. It wasn't threatening her. It was pleading. Emma hesitated, her mind racing. She was exhausted, freezing, and running out of time. Lily was waiting for her at home, depending on her. She couldn't afford to waste precious minutes on this. But the look in the creature's eyes stopped her. It wasn't just a predator. It was a parent, desperate to save its child, just like her. Emma lowered the flare gun slowly and stepped closer. The creature tensed but didn't move. She crouched beside the youngling and examined its leg. The beam wasn't too heavy. She could lift it. But doing so would make her vulnerable. She glanced up at the larger alien. "I'll help," she said, though she doubted it understood her. "But you have to stay back." The alien tilted its head, clicking softly, and took a step away. Emma took a deep breath and gripped the edge of the beam. It was icy and slippery, but she managed to lift it just enough for the youngling to wiggle free. As soon as it was free, the larger alien rushed forward, gathering the smaller one in its arms. Emma stumbled back, her hands raised, but the creature didn't attack. Instead, it looked at her, its black eyes filled with something she didn't expect. Gratitude. It clicked softly, almost like a purr, and then turned to leave, carrying its child toward the depot's back exit. Emma watched them go, her heart still pounding. She didn't know what she had just done, or if she had made the right choice, but one thing was clear. The storm wasn't the only danger out here. There were other lives at stake, other stories of survival unfolding in the cold. She tightened her grip on her bag and turned back toward the shelves. She still had work to do. A dangerous discovery. The air inside the depot was as cold as the storm outside, biting into Emma's skin through her layers of clothing. The faint metallic scent of frozen steel hung in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of her own fear. She pulled her scarf tighter around her face and kept moving, her flashlight beam cutting through the dense shadows. With her bag nearly full of supplies, Emma knew it was time to leave. But something stopped her. A strange feeling gnawed at her gut, a sense that the danger wasn't over yet. She paused, listening carefully. The storm outside had dulled into a distant roar, but within the depot, an eerie silence lingered. Emma scanned the rows of shelves again, her breath clouding in the icy air. Then she saw it, a faint trail of blood smeared across the floor, leading deeper into the depot. Her heart quickened. The blood was fresh, dark against the frost-covered ground, and it disappeared into the shadows beyond the last row of shelves. She wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around and get back to Lily. But curiosity, and something deeper, maybe guilt, drove her forward. What if someone else was out here, hurt and alone? What if it was another parent, another life hanging in the balance? Emma followed the trail cautiously, stepping lightly to avoid making noise. Her flashlight flickered, casting fleeting shapes across the walls. She tightened her grip on it, willing it to stay on. The trail led to a corner of the depot where a large metal crate had toppled over, spilling its contents, a mix of tools, blankets, and shattered glass. Behind the crate, huddled in the corner, was something small and fragile. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was an alien child, its translucent skin faintly glowing in the dark. Its large black eyes blinked at her, filled with fear and pain. One of its legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, the injury oozing dark, viscous blood. It shivered violently, its small frame barely visible beneath the thin layer of frost clinging to its body. Emma's first thought was to back away, to leave it and focus on her mission. But as she stared at the creature, she saw something familiar in its trembling form. It reminded her of Lily, small and vulnerable, waiting for her to come home. The child whimpered softly, its voice like a faint echo in the cold air. Emma's heart clenched. She knew what it felt like to be desperate, to fight for the life of someone you loved. She couldn't ignore it. "Okay," she whispered, lowering her flashlight. "Okay, I'll help you." She knelt beside the child, moving slowly to avoid scaring it. The creature flinched at her approach, its thin hands curling protectively around its injured leg. Emma held out her hand, palm up, and spoke softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The alien child hesitated, its wide eyes watching her intently. Then, cautiously, it relaxed its grip on its leg, allowing her to see the full extent of the injury. The sight made Emma's stomach turn. The wound was deep, the skin around it turning a sickly shade of blue. Without help, the child wouldn't survive the night. Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a thermal blanket. She gently wrapped it around the child, who let out a soft, relieved sound as the warmth enveloped it. "There you go," she murmured. "That's better, isn't it?" The child's eyes flickered toward her, and for the first time, Emma thought she saw something other than fear. Gratitude, maybe. Trust. But as she worked, a low growl rumbled through the air, freezing her in place. Emma turned her head slowly, her flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. At the far end of the depot, two glowing yellow eyes appeared, glaring at her with predatory intent. It was the larger alien she had encountered outside. Its massive frame moved with deadly grace as it stepped into the light. Emma's pulse raced. She had helped its child, but that didn't mean it wouldn't see her as a threat. She raised her hand slowly, speaking in a calm, steady voice. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." The alien's growl deepened, its sharp claws clicking against the frozen floor as it approached. Emma's mind raced, searching for a way to show it she meant no harm. Then she did something reckless. She pointed to the injured child, then placed a hand on her own chest. "I'm helping," she said, her voice trembling. "Just helping." The creature paused, its head tilting as it regarded her. Its glowing eyes flicked to the child, then back to Emma. The growling stopped, replaced by a series of low, rhythmic clicks. It stepped closer, and Emma braced herself, her fingers twitching toward the flare gun in her bag. But instead of attacking, the creature crouched beside the child and inspected its injury. It made soft clicking sounds, almost like a parent soothing its baby. Emma stayed perfectly still, her heart pounding as she watched. After a tense moment, the alien turned to her and let out a single short click. It wasn't hostile. If anything, it sounded grateful. Emma exhaled shakily, her body sagging with relief. She didn't know what had just happened, but one thing was clear. She had earned the creature's trust. For now. The storm outside howled louder, reminding her that time was running out. She had saved the alien child, But she still needed to save her own. A selfless choice. The storm had grown fiercer outside, rattling the walls of the depot and howling through every crack and crevice. Emma leaned against the icy shelves, her legs trembling from exhaustion. The alien parent had retreated into the shadows with its injured child, but its glowing yellow eyes lingered on her, watching her every move. Her bag was full now. Thermal blankets, heat packs, and the portable heater she had desperately sought. She tightened the straps and exhaled, her breath misting in the frozen air. It was time to go. Lily was waiting for her, and every second she spent here was a second closer to the cold creeping into their home. But as Emma turned toward the exit, a soft sound stopped her in her tracks. It was a faint whimper, almost a cry, coming from the alien child. She turned back and saw the parent gently cradling its injured offspring, its sharp claws surprisingly tender. The smaller alien was shivering violently, its translucent skin taking on a grayish hue. It wasn't just the injury. The cold was killing it. Emma's chest tightened. She could feel the parent's helplessness radiating from its every movement, the way it clicked softly, trying to comfort its young. It was the same way she had held Lily on nights when the fear of the storm was too much for her daughter to bear. She should leave. The rational part of her screamed that this wasn't her problem. She had what she needed, and her own child's life depended on her making it back in time. But as Emma looked at the alien parent, she saw herself reflected in its glowing eyes. Desperate, terrified, willing to do anything to save its child. Emma swallowed hard. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath. She dropped her bag and rummaged through it, pulling out one of the thermal blankets. The alien parent stiffened, its body tensing as she approached. Emma held up her hands, showing the blanket. "It's okay," she said softly. "I just want to help." The parent watched her carefully but didn't move to stop her as she crouched beside the injured child. The young alien's breathing was shallow, its tiny chest rising and falling rapidly. Emma draped the thermal blanket over it, tucking it in as best as she could. The child let out a soft, pitiful sound, but its shivering began to ease. The parent clicked low and steady, a sound that almost felt like a thank you. Emma glanced at it and gave a small nod. "You'll need to get it somewhere safe. This storm isn't going to let up." As if it understood, the parent shifted its injured child, cradling it more securely. Emma stepped back and grabbed her bag, her movements quick and efficient. She couldn't afford to lose any more time. But as she moved toward the door, the alien parent let out a sharp, urgent click. Emma turned, her flashlight illuminating the parent's face. It gestured toward her with one of its claws, then pointed toward the child, and finally toward the storm outside. Emma froze. "You want me to take it?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. The parent clicked again, louder this time, and nudged the youngling toward her. Emma's heart sank. The alien parent couldn't survive the storm with its injured child, not in its current state. It was asking her to do the impossible, to take the child and keep it safe. "No," Emma whispered, shaking her head. "I can't. I have my own child to think about." But as she said the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. If she left the child here, it wouldn't survive. The parent knew that. It had already made its choice. It was giving its child a chance, no matter how slim, by putting its trust in her. Emma clenched her fists, the cold biting into her skin, even through her gloves. "This is insane," she muttered, but she crouched down and gently scooped the alien child into her arms. It was lighter than she expected, its fragile body trembling against her. The parent let out a low, mournful click, but it didn't try to stop her. Emma looked back at it, her throat tightening. "I'll try," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll try to keep it safe." The parent watched her for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the shadows, its glowing eyes fading into the darkness. Emma stood there for a second, holding the youngling and listening to the storm battering the walls. She didn't know if she had just made the right decision or the worst mistake of her life. Adjusting her bag and securing the child against her chest, she pushed open the depot door. The storm hit her like a physical blow, snow and ice slicing at her exposed skin. She pulled the scarf tighter around her face and stepped out, her boots crunching against the snow. The alien child whimpered softly, curling into the warmth of the thermal blanket. Emma glanced down at it, then out into the endless white. "Don't make me regret this," she muttered, before trudging forward into the storm. The journey back would be harder, slower. The storm was angrier now, and her arms ached from holding the child. But she couldn't think about that. All she could think about was Lily, and the fragile life she now carried in her arms. A heartwarming end. The storm had finally begun to relent, its deafening roar softening to a distant whisper. Emma's legs trembled with exhaustion as she trudged through the snow, her body on the verge of collapse. The alien child in her arms had stopped whimpering, its small body warm under the thermal blanket. That was both a relief and a worry. Its silence might mean it was conserving its last bits of energy. "Just hold on," Emma muttered, her breath visible in the icy air. "We're almost there." The faint outline of her house appeared through the haze of snow, and a rush of relief surged through her. But then her heart sank. The front door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. Panic shot through her as she quickened her pace, ignoring the pain in her legs. "Lily!" she called out, her voice hoarse. The sound barely carried in the still biting wind. Reaching the door, Emma shoved it open and stumbled inside, the warmth of the interior hitting her like a wave. She looked around frantically. The blankets on the couch were in disarray, and Bun Bun, Lily's beloved stuffed rabbit, lay on the floor. Her heart pounded. "Lily!" she shouted again, her voice breaking. A small, muffled voice came from the back room. "Mommy." Relief washed over Emma like a flood. She hurried toward the sound and found Lily huddled under a pile of blankets in her bedroom. The little girl's face lit up when she saw her mother, and she ran into Emma's arms. "You came back," Lily cried, her voice trembling. Emma held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Of course I did, baby. I told you I'd always come back." Lily pulled back slightly, her eyes falling on the bundle in Emma's arms. "What's that?" she asked, her curiosity cutting through her fear. Emma hesitated, glancing down at the alien child. Its large black eyes blinked up at her, its translucent skin now glowing faintly, a sign that its condition was stabilizing. "It's a friend," Emma said softly. "It needed our help." Lily tilted her head, looking at the alien with wide eyes. "Is it like the monsters in the storm?" "No," Emma said firmly. "It's just a baby, like you. It's scared and cold, but it's not a monster." Lily reached out cautiously, her small hand brushing against the alien's blanket. The creature let out a soft, almost musical chirp, and Lily's face lit up. "It's warm," she said with a smile. "Can we keep it?" Emma couldn't help but laugh, though it was strained from the weight of the day. "We're not keeping it, sweetie. We're just helping it until it's safe." The storm outside had mostly died down, leaving a quiet stillness in its wake. Emma placed the alien child on the couch, bundling it up with extra blankets. Lily sat beside it, her curiosity turning into care as she gently tucked Bun Bun beside the alien. "This will make it feel better," she said. Emma felt a lump in her throat as she watched her daughter. Despite everything, Lily's kindness shone through. She knelt beside her and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're very brave, you know that," Emma said. Lily smiled. "Like you, Mommy." The moment was interrupted by a loud scraping sound from outside. Emma froze, her hand instinctively moving to the flare gun tucked in her bag. She motioned for Lily to stay behind her as she moved to the door, opening it cautiously. Standing in the snow, just beyond the threshold, was the alien parent. Its massive frame was silhouetted against the pale light of dawn, its glowing yellow eyes locked on Emma. For a tense moment, neither of them moved. Then the parent stepped forward, its claws dragging something heavy behind it. Emma's grip on the door tightened, her body tense. But as the creature moved closer, she realized what it was carrying. It wasn't a weapon or a threat. It was a bundle of strange, alien fruits, covered in frost, but glistening like gemstones. The parent placed them gently at her feet and clicked softly, bowing its head. Emma blinked, unsure how to respond. She knelt down and picked up one of the fruits, its surface cold but smooth. It was offering her a gift, a gesture of gratitude. "You're welcome," Emma said softly, though she doubted the creature understood her words. She stepped aside, letting the parent into the house. The alien parent moved cautiously, its eyes scanning the room until it found its child. It clicked loudly, a sound that was almost musical, and the youngling chirped in response. The parent scooped the child into its arms, holding it close. Emma watched as the alien turned back to her, its glowing eyes meeting hers. There was something unspoken between them, a bond forged in desperation and trust. The parent clicked again, softer this time, before turning and walking out into the fading storm. Lily ran to the door, watching as the parent disappeared into the snowy horizon. "Do you think they'll be okay?" she asked. Emma knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I think they'll be just fine," she said, though her voice was heavy with emotion. "They're tougher than they look." As the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, Emma pulled Lily close. The storm had tested them in ways she hadn't imagined, but they had survived. And in their survival, they had found something unexpected, a connection that transcended species and language, born from an act of selfless bravery. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma allowed herself to smile.